journey on this topic several years ago when I was teaching fourth grade math, and I noticed that as the years went on, the kids were getting more and more frustrated at the amount of work and pressure that was being placed upon them for things like the fourth grade, throughout the years, like the OAA test, the AIR test, and just the state mandated test. My final straw came when I watched as a little fourth grade boy in the middle of the test put his head down in his hand and just bawled during the test, and he said, "This is so hard." And it's kind of sparked my thinking that the amount of stress that we're putting on these kids, they kind of need a release. So it began my thinking. I noticed how long the kids were sitting from class to class, and in fourth grade we had about 1 hour, 25 minutes, and so the kids would come to my class for 1 hour and 25 minutes, then they would go to the next class, maybe it'd be language arts or social studies or science, and they would be there for 1 hour, 25 minutes. And then, we would have a recess and lunch. Our recess is about 20 minutes, and then we'd have a lunch break, and then they repeat the same thing for the afternoon. And at our school, we generally do our specials for 1 week, so they would only have gym 1 week out of the month, or for a 4-week rotation. So there was not a lot of opportunity for movement, and if it was a rainy day or a snowy day where you can't go outside, we do indoor recess, which is really not a lot of movement either. So I started to research, and I found some information on stability balls, whether it was beneficial, whether it was helping. So I approached our principal. We did some things to get some funding. So that's how my journey started. So stability balls, if you were unfamiliar with them, they started out with exercise. So they benefit the core, the abdominal core. They help with balance, with posture. A lot of people use them to provide support for the trunk, the legs, and the feet whenever they're exercising. Occupational therapists started using them to help for things such as their sensory, helping the kids that needed extra sensory techniques. They helped with distraction. The kids that were bouncing on the balls seemed less distracted when they were in class, and helped with their balance, providing them a reason to pay attention. If you don't pay attention, you're going to fall off your ball. At our school, I know they also use an alternative, which is a wiggle seat, they call it, and it kind of has little bumps on it, and it just looks like a half of a ball, and the kids would put them on their seat. Maybe one per grade level, if that. Sometimes the kids would use them. And honestly, in all of my years, I only had 2 students that came to my class with a wiggle seat, and only 1 that used it consistently. In the 1980s, in Switzerland, a program called Moving Students Are Better Learners initiated, where they brought stability balls into the classroom, almost to every single classroom. And their thought was that if kids were moving, they wouldn't be bored. They would pay attention more, they would pay attention longer, and so they would focus on their classroom activities. And the teachers loved it. They said that it actually decreased the noise, which is kind of funny because when I started it, I really had to get used to the noise of the balls bouncing on the floor, or they like to rock back and forth, and the noise of the ball on the floor is kind of like a constant, So that was difficult, and when I actually did my research, I got the stability balls. They have 4 little legs. They almost look like an udder on a cow, and the kids can't rock back and forth, There were some instances where they pulled the balls and tried to jump around the room on them, but for the most part, the classroom looked like that, and the kids would stay focused, And with the Switzerland study, the teachers reported that the Hyper kids could jiggle without moving the furniture. Like, you don't hear the tables jiggling, you don't hear the chairs jiggling. And after the newness wears off, the kids really do pay more attention to their work than they do to the balls. And the teachers reported that the class was calmer with the stability balls. So that's just a little background on the balls. All right, so in 2018, the Center for Disease Control put out some new statistics with autism. 1 in 59 kids in the United States are currently being diagnosed as autistic. 1 in 37 boys and 1 in 151 girls. And along with that, in 2017, the ADD Research Center said that 6.4 million American kids are diagnosed with ADHD. So a large amount of children are entering our classrooms unable to sit still, unable to, or needing help sitting still, needing help focusing on their classroom work. Teachers are looking for accommodations. We talked about the wiggle seats. Also, flexible seating is another option. In that case, there's just different types of chairs in the classroom set up for the students, and they're able to select what kind of chair they use. I know a lot of elementary schools use that, and it might just be as simple as a few chairs with a few different types of options, like maybe there's what we call a trampoline chair, and it almost looks like a trampoline, and the kids sit on it, and there's just a small bounce. It looks like a moon chair. The stability balls. One time I had a standing center where the kids could stand up during my class instead of sitting at their chair if that was preferential to them. So there's different kind of things that teachers are looking for. What I noticed was that there are few studies using the entire classroom. A lot of the studies that were done that I'll talk about used students that were already labeled with some type of learning disability. They were unable to sit. But we look at the other kids that are maybe not diagnosed, or that are high functioning, or that don't need a regular accommodation in our eyes, that we would think, oh, they could be able to sit for 20 minutes or 30 minutes and go through a lesson, when they're really unable to. So, also, no studies were available looking at student perception. So what do students think about this? Do they really understand why it is that they are unable to focus, and if they're using an accommodation, does it help? Like, the balls are a lot of fun, you know, they get to bounce around, they get to move. It adds something to the classroom that doesn't make it so rigid, it's not familiar. So it seems like they're having fun. But do they understand, like, are they able to look at it and say, this is helping me focus? I'm able to bounce, get out my wiggles, and focus. Oops.
If you aim it up,
Oh, this, got it. There we go. All right, so the literature available looked at the following things: in-seat behavior, engagement, performance, standardized test scores, and disruptive behavior. There's not a ton of literature available on the subject of using the stability balls, but the first study that I could find in 2003, where the students increased their in-seat behavior. They took 3 fourth grade students, 2 boys, 1 girl, all 3 labeled as ADHD, and they studied them for just a short amount of time, and they looked, does the stability ball give them what they need? And of course it says yes, it increases their behavior. Then in 2004, additional research came out for students, preschool students with autism. And they said yes, it improves their in-seat behavior and engagement. On carpet time, they just focused on the one particular time, which was carpet time. The 4 students that they chose were fitted for the stability balls because they are different sized. I know in my second grade classroom, I have kids that are very large to kids that are teeny tiny. So I have different size balls. We ordered one general size for the second grade, but I also have larger balls from whenever I taught the fourth grade, so I could use that. But the preschoolers were fitted so that they were able to use them, and they liked it, and they were able to stay on task. But no one was really looking at the general education population. Is this helping the general education kids? Is it just a toy? Is it just a fad or whatever? So looking at performance in 2012, a study was done with 4 general ed students, 2 girls, 2 boys, and they looked at doodling versus using the stability ball. So they used a literature activity where the kids had to answer literature questions. They did the activity with doodling, and then they repeated the activity again with the stability balls. And they found that the students improved their performance both, but they preferred doodling. They preferred to doodle over using stability balls. So an interesting thing. Then the standardized test in 2016, 3 classes of 6th graders, 24 students in each class. They did, one class was the control class, another class used the stability balls, and third class used activity breaks. And they found that the balls gave more focus and greater alertness. They also improved their standardized test scores. But they said that the students with the sensory disorders were really the only students that were benefiting. So they didn't advise it for all students. Likewise, in 2015, they looked at students' achievement, their on-task behavior, and their control when they were on the ball. And they saw a downward trend of disruptive behaviors in the treatment classrooms versus the students that used the regular balls. But they decided that the balls were not also good for all students, just for students with sensory disorders. All right, so the research questions, in my original study I had 7, but for the summer we kind of combined them and looked at only 4, sorry. So does the extended use of stability balls as chairs over a 6-week time span affect time on task in a second grade classroom? So I wanted to know, if we use this for the 6 weeks, are the kids going to be able to stay on task? And then the second question was exactly the same. The only difference was academic achievement. The third question, what are students' perceptions concerning the stability balls? Do they know what's going on? And to what extent do students' perceptions on the stability balls, academic achievement, and time on task help explain the relationship between stability balls, academic achievement, and time on task? And when I give you the results, I combine questions 3 and 4. Okay, for the research design, I used a descriptive quantitative study with the independent variable being the seating choice. It was an ABC design, a baseline, an intervention, and a choice phase. So during the baseline phase, it was 1 week, and the students were introduced to the math lesson the same exact way. We break our math lesson in 2nd grade into using Eureka Math, or Engage New York, whichever, if you're familiar with it. In the lesson, we have a carpet time, which is usually on a smart board. We play the games, we introduce the lesson. The second part is we do games where the children move around the classroom. They play great games, maybe in a small group, maybe a whole class, or possibly even on their own. And then the final part of the math lesson is a worksheet, and they suggest 8 to 10 minutes, which their differentiation is if the students are higher level, they're going to finish to the harder problems. So that was just piggybacking on the last presentation. But anyways, so the intervention phase, we added the stability balls to the classroom. So the kids had 3 weeks. We used 2 weeks prior prior to the data collection, so that the kids were used to the balls, they were able to function in the math classroom without having the balls as a new distraction. We took the STAR Math test. It's a Renaissance test where it will give you a grade level, approximate grade level of the students. It gives us suggestions on where the students are educationally, what they need to work on, and it gives them a score. I use the score to determine a number of growth between each of the levels. So at the end of the baseline, we took the test. Then at the end of the intervention, we took the test again to give that, and again at the end of the choice. I think I forgot to tell you that during the baseline, also the observation started. The researcher had a an observation sheet where it has a bunch of boxes. The kids' names could be put in them, or a number, depending on which class it was. And every time they were off task, just a tally mark was made, and the tallies could be counted up. And during the intervention phase, they were on the ball, obviously. The third was a choice phase, where they decided that if they want to sit on the ball, they could. If they wanted to sit on a regular classroom chair, that was their choice. The researcher, whenever the observations were taking place, also noted which students were on the ball, which students were off the ball. Also if it was a choice, if it was a behavior reason for being taken off the ball, then that was also noted, because students were not frequently, but sometimes were taken off their ball for behavior reasons just because of safety. After the choice phase, there were a teacher survey was given, a student survey was given, and an interview was done, and I'll talk more about those. Okay, the participants, 77 second grade students participated. There were 4 classroom teachers, 2 girls, 2 boys, which might be something that I'll talk about at the end, but it might possibly have a difference, I don't know. But the two girl teachers were the ones that volunteered to use the stability balls in the classroom. The 2 male teachers, they said they would rather use the classroom chairs. And then we also have an intervention specialist that comes into our classroom, so she was able to give her input because she travels to all 4 of our classrooms, so she would see the students on the balls and the students off the balls. And also a speech pathologist who works in our classrooms as well, who also participated because she was in during the time of the use. The second grade students, we have a high rate of IEPs in our school district. So we had a total of 10 second grade students out of the 77 currently on an IEP. There were about 6, I believe, at the end of the year that were being tested for an IEP. So a large amount of students. We had 1 nonverbal autistic student in our data. He was actually in one of the control classrooms, but that was something that I thought was important, and I kind of was hoping he was in the treatment classes, but he was not. All right, the instruments, the STAR Math test, again, is a Renaissance test where it is measuring the students and measuring their math ability, classroom observations done by the researcher, tallying sheets, deciding which students were on task, which students were off task prior to it, deciding if it was off task, it was just students that were not engaged with the teacher, maybe staring at the window, maybe bouncing and not paying attention, those type of things. The student survey, which we'll talk about the results in a minute, the survey was read by the researcher, and there were 6 questions. Each question had boxes, and the boxes correlated to the responses. So like if the answer was not at all, it would be a very small box, but if the answer was all the time, then it would be a big box. This teacher survey was given to the teachers after all the research was finished. They had 1 week to get the survey back to me. Everybody got it back quick. And then the student interviews took place at the end, where I interviewed 17 students individually, one-on-one in the classroom, to talk about their perceptions. again, the data collection, classroom observations, STAR math test in each phase, and then the surveys and the interviews at the end. The data analysis, the classroom observations were tallied up, totaled, an average or mean was found for each of the treatment classrooms during each phase. The STAR math test scores were found for all 4 classes, the treatment classrooms as well as the control classrooms. A score was given to each student as a positive or a negative growth measure. The student survey results were tallied and graphed. Teacher survey results, same, tallied and graphed. And student interviews, I did use MaxQDA at the beginning of this. It was kind of thought that it was going to be qualitative data, but we ended up changing it to quantitative data after, and we'll talk about why later. All right, the results on test behavior increased. There's, pause 1 second. I have the wrong, is that okay if I switch it?
Yeah.
Okay, because the results are not up here. Sorry. Well, I'll just talk about it then. Okay, so sorry about that. All right, the on-test behavior increased for the classrooms. The first class, the 2 treatment classrooms, started with an on-test, an off-test, sorry. Here we go. An academic growth of negative 5.1, and class B was negative 25. So for an average of 15.1 was the academic growth between phases during the intervention phase to the treatment phase. So the students actually went down quite a bit. The class B was really concerning because they lost 25 instructional points on their math test. And so when I looked at the control classes, both control classes, class C was 28.8 and class D was 28.9. So only, a 1/10 of a point difference there. So the control had an average of 28.9 in their growth score. So 43.8 points larger of growth than the treatment classes. So after looking at that, it was kind of concerning, like, what is really going on? Is this working at all? So the intervention to the choice then, a little bit better, class A 26.3 and class B 17.2. So they were showing a positive growth here, but still lower, 7.1 average points, less than the control class. So the students sitting in the chair are showing that they are growing faster than the kids that were on the ball. However, whenever I looked at off-task behaviors in the baseline, 41 off-task behaviors in class A and 49.3 off-task behaviors in class B. During the intervention phase, it dropped to 9.1 and 13.3 off-task behaviors. So the amount of time that the students were paying attention greatly increased, or were less distracted, while the students that were on the ball lost instructional points. And then from the intervention to the choice phase, went from 9.1 to 8.6 in Class B, 13.3 to 11.3 in the choice phase. So definitely a decrease in off-task behaviors, however, not a increase in academic achievement. Which was probably the biggest or the hardest part to think about. Why did the on-task behavior increase, but the academic achievement did not increase? So when I looked at things, some new research is coming out about how the setup of the classroom, male versus female teachers. One thing I noticed was the female teachers, after I read all this and looked at the data, I looked at our classrooms. I know my classroom is full of bright colors. There's something going on everywhere. The other female teacher, exactly, her theme last year was a blue and white theme. However, there's lots of patterns, all the bulletin boards are decorated, there's things going on everywhere. And then when I went into the two male classrooms, they were very dull colored. The one hardly has anything up on his walls. So interesting research is showing that the more things that there are in the classroom, the less the students are able to concentrate. So maybe a male versus female thing, I'm not sure. But that's one of the things that I thought about after I did all the research. Also, discipline styles. I know that I'm very laid back, very relaxed, whereas the one male teacher is very rigid. He sticks to a schedule. Everything is done the same, precisely. Everyone needs to be in their seats, very old school. So that's something that I looked at. Students consistently selected a stability ball over a chair when given the choice. So during the choice phase, all the kids consistently did so. One of the things that I noticed, I have had two students in my own classroom that I was really, really excited about getting the balls for. This student who is being tested over the school year, I thought he would love it. I thought this was gonna be fabulous for him. And he did not want to finish the intervention phase. He clearly wanted off of the ball. He thought that this is too much for me, and it was just too much stimulation for him. Another student that was very high functioning, very actually tested into the Excel program for the next year, and his grades dropped. When I looked at individual grades, which was not part of the study, but whenever I looked at things that could go further, he was just overstimulated and was not focusing on what he was supposed to do. There were kids that I really thought would use the balls that didn't, and there were kids that I thought would want to use the ball that didn't. Or maybe, I don't know if that's right. Students showed a strong preference for stability balls while making some connections between learning and stability ball use. Some kids said they were able to concentrate. They said that it made them feel like they were less wiggly. They said that they thought that they could work longer, things like that. But very few students gave those type of response. Most students said they were fun, they were comfortable, they felt like they were giving them lots of energy, things like that. Teachers found higher energy levels in the classroom when stability balls were used. The funny thing about the survey, all the teachers that gave the survey suggested stability ball use, that said that they would prefer to, or they would suggest them to other classroom teachers, that they felt that the students worked longer, they felt that the students worked harder. The only thing they didn't feel that the students produced better work. That came out as neutral. No one was saying that they disagreed, but nobody said that that was an agreement. Students did not clearly perceive a connection between stability balls and educational improvement. So it did not show that there were a ton of connections made, very few students. Some of the responses during the interviews that I thought were important, like some of the kids were like, well, I just got smarter. We've been in school more days. I'm smarter. That's how come I know more stuff. And they didn't think that, you know, well, maybe because I'm focusing more, something like that. All right, optimal stimulation theory and sensory processing theory were the two theories that I looked at. I thought that kids that were able to self-stimulate using the balls were able to pay attention more. Students that needed the extra stimulation were getting that. Students that didn't need that were overstimulated and unable to produce the work. The sensory processing theory, along the same lines of thinking, that the students that used the balls were able to process what they were needing to do. They were able to self-stimulate. In 1997, Greenspan and Wilder did a study. 95% of students with autism stereotyped movements to regulate their sensory systems. A lot of kids flat, things like that. Students with autism or with a learning disability using the balls are able to bounce rather than make the stereotyped movements. Maybe causing less distraction in the classroom, maybe causing less distraction for themselves or the neighbors, not sure. So in conclusion, on-task behaviors increased, academic gains were not seen, enjoyment and energy levels were high. Most students could not make the connection between the stability balls and the classroom improvements. So while they were fun, they did decrease the off-task behavior, but academic gains not seen. Recommendations: study the value of on-task behavior and the connections between on-task behavior and academic achievements. It's important to know that the students' on-task behavior and academic achievement did not connect. Determine if stability balls work for all students or just parts of the student population. I'm not sure. When I think about an elementary classroom, a second grade classroom especially, I'm not sure that I would, as a teacher, be able to say, you can use a stability ball, but you can't. You know, I'm not sure that that would be something that I would feel okay about doing. Even though I know that it's not beneficial for you, and that's beneficial for you, I'm not sure how to make that determination. Okay, questions?
You made note about the research making observations and tallying. Did you have a defined definition of what off-task behavior looked like?
Yes.
Okay.
Anything that I define off-task behavior